Good evening. We'll call this regular meeting of council to order. That's an interesting sound. Good evening. We'll call the regular meeting of council for Monday, January 9th, 2012 to order. I'll ask council to consider the adoption of the agenda with one additional item, which is item number 11, and it's appointments of council. So I'll ask that the agenda for the regular council meeting of July 9th, 2012 be adopted as circulated and to include item 11. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Kinney. Are there any discussions? Questions been called. Those in favor? Thank you. The agenda is adopted. I'll ask council to consider minutes for adoption. There's a recommendation that the minutes of the special council meeting of December 12th, 2011 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Garon. Are there any errors or omissions? Questions been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those minutes are adopted. Next are the minutes, recommendation for adoption. That's the regular council meeting of December 12th, 2011. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Carlick Pearson. Are there any errors or omissions? Questions been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those minutes are adopted. The last set of minutes for adoption are the minutes from the special council meeting of December 19th, 2011. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Garon. Are there any errors or omissions? Questions been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those minutes are also adopted. Next, we'll move on to unfinished business. At the last council meeting, there was an announcement from Councillor Ashley about her intentions with regards to a notice of motion that budget workshops be open to the public. Councillor Ashley.
So I'll officially make that a motion, so that all budget workshops be open to the public, with the framework to be decided with staff input and that sort of thing. But so that's the motion. I'll wait to see if it's seconded, and then we can discuss it.
Certainly. Seconded by Councillor Kinney. Go ahead.
So my biggest reason for this, and I mean it's come before the election, but during the election, a lot of people, and even at the last couple of years of budget, a lot of people have had concerns. Number one, with not having the budget early enough, and so that they could ask questions. Sometimes people weren't sure about what was going on, and it's not that anybody's been trying to hide anything, but I think that there are a number of people in town that would just like to know a little bit more about the state of finances that our city is in. And because they would, they're interested, and I think they have a right to know what those things are. And I think also this will help us when we're still going to have to make some hard decisions as we come up in our budget process regarding, what are we going to support in terms of grants as we're going through this week? What are we going to put money towards? How are we going to deal with our infrastructure project? What are we going to do with an emergency services building? And I think that for people to understand the exact nature of the finances that our city is in, that's just going to make a big difference in terms of trying to explain to people, okay, well, we've got X amount of dollars, we only have that much, we have to figure out how we're going to use it. So that's basically the intent of the motion. I know that at the previous meeting I had said, I would like to see what our previous budget workshops and have them televised, but I do take into account what Councillor Thorkelson said last time and a couple other people in terms of maybe that's not the best process, and I know staff had said that they were going to look at different possible ways we could do it. But the intent just being that as we go through the budget process, whether we do it by meeting by meeting or whatever, that people are informed and know what's going on.
Certainly. Thank you. Are there any other comments? It's been moved and seconded. No other discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. We'll move on to reports and recommendations. There's a report from the Chief Financial Officer regarding community enhancement grants. This concerns the policy, and there's a recommendation that Council amend the existing community enhancement grant policy by approving the following staff recommendations. Mr. Rodin, would you please go ahead?
Certainly, Your Worship. There was a motion at the last council meeting that the existing policy be put on the agenda tonight for discussion. To facilitate some of that discussion, what we've done is we've done a bit of an analysis of the existing policy and made some recommendations. The recommendations, there's 4 of them. The first being that the policy be changed so that all grant applicants have to make a public presentation. That has been the practice for the last number of years, but it would probably be a good idea to codify that. The second recommendation is that the existing policy contemplates essentially 1-year commitments by council. That makes it difficult for organizations to do their financial planning on a multi-year basis. So, for example, I'll pick on the Leicester Centre. Every year we've been giving them $110,000. It would probably be easier for them if they knew that they were going to get X amount for the next 2 years or 3 years, and if their financial situation changed, they could come back to council and either request more money, or should the city's financial situation change also. But that would give that board the ability to know that this is what they're going to get. The second part of that recommendation on the multi-year agreement would be that they still would have to come each year and explain what they did in the previous year, and if council had set objectives for them or wanted them to report on specific things. So there still would be a lot of public accountability for the money that they're getting, and the process would still be transparent. The final recommendation is that, much like in 2008, council passed a motion saying that we should notify everybody that in 2009 that the grants could be reduced. That be done again. It's a bit difficult this year to significantly change a long-standing grant amount, because we're already into the new fiscal period for most organizations. However, if council was to make a motion that they be notified that in 2013 that their grants could be either significantly reduced or eliminated, that would give them a lot of lead time to either find new ways of operating and accessing new revenues, or otherwise doing something differently. So those are the 4 recommendations. There's a few other little notes that I've made there. One, that the grant process, the timing of the grant process is very important for most of these groups, in that they can't really do a lot until they know what they're going to receive from the city. And if the city wants to cut their grant or change the grant amount significantly, they need to know as quickly as possible. So whatever changes council wants to make to the policy, after your discussion tonight, it's recommended that you continue to follow a process that will hopefully allow people to know quite early in their fiscal period. And it's noted that this year, the last number of years, we've actually done a lot of the work in October and November, but this year, because there was a new council coming, and the decision was to defer it until January. Okay. And the other note, the other piece there is simply that I've attached a schedule showing what everybody's gotten over the last number of years, and I've noted that because of the finite amount of funding, that there's sort of been a certain group that, because they've been getting money in the past, they continue to get money into the future, and there's been very little variation. Very few other organizations have ever managed to get funding. The notable exception, of course, would be for one-offs such as the Snowbirds or the Northern Winter Games. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. I'll ask Council's consideration of the recommendations. A mover and a seconder. Councillor Ashley.
Well, I appreciate the effort that staff has gone to, and I think there's a lot of good information here. Not sure I agree with everything that's on here, so I'm not sure I would want to move the recommendation exactly as it is. And I also have some other things, so I'm not sure what the best way would be.
Well, there's numbers 1 to 5 there. You could move the ones that you think are appropriate, and if there's a seconder, we'll proceed on those and consider the others subsequently.
Okay, well, I would first off move the recommendation, and I would leave out that all grant applicants be required to make a public presentation to council for right now, and talk about that one separately, but the rest of the recommendation as it is. Okay,
so you'd move all of them except item number 1.
Yeah, just so that we can have a discussion separately on that one.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Guerin. Is there any discussion? Councillor Ashley, please go ahead.
Well, the biggest reason I think that a lot of this makes sense. We've got groups that come to us every year. It makes sense that if we know we're going to be funding them over the next few years, let's put something in place so that it's maybe we don't have to be deciding this. It makes it more stable for us for budget purposes, all of those sorts of things. And as long as they're still having to come to us and show that their objectives have been met and they're following all of the guidelines, I think it just makes sense. So.
All right. Is there any other comments? If not, I'll call for the question. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion passes. Is there anybody that would like to have a discussion after moving item 1? You can move it and second it for discussion purposes. It could fail subsequently, but this council then gets an opportunity to discuss the staff recommendation. And that is that all grant applicants be required to make public presentations to council. Councillor Ashley.
I would move the recommendation, but with the amendment at the end that all grant applications be required to make public presentations to council when asked to. And I'll explain why if it gets seconded.
Okay, so that would be the motion. That's seconded by Councillor Carlick-Pearson. Is there any discussion? Councillor Ashley.
Well, the biggest reason, and it may be that we decide that we want to hear from everybody, but we do get, and I'm not sure that everybody in the public knows, but we get these big binders that have all of the application information.
Yeah, don't drop that. You might hurt the desk.
Well, I'll try not to. So it may be that we don't always have to hear from all of the applicants, but there may be questions that councillors have after they read things. So if we have a policy that says that they know that they might be required if asked to, then we know that that's a possibility, but it just allows us to say, well, you know what, we've got the information we need except for these ones.
So it allows for some flexibility. Yes. Right, thank you. Are there any other comments? Councillor Guerin.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure if we want to amend this further. I guess it could be a separate motion, but I think the grants should be categorized. So if we've got like the big 6 fall under a different policy.
That could be a discussion during this year's discussions, if you like. That would probably be the best way to handle that.
Sure. If everybody else is okay with that, if you want to deal with it now or later, or have staff look at it.
Councillor Ashley.
Well, I have actually a number of similar types of recommendations that I know that we're not going to solve tonight, but I think probably it would be good after we talk about this to have a discussion so that at least staff knows the kinds of things we're looking at, and then we could have a discussion later.
So I have a discussion after this motion, or
yes.
At the first community enhancement grant meeting?
I think it would be good to at least have a brief discussion after this, just because it's fresh in our mind and we've been thinking about it since it was on the agenda. At least I have. I know other people have too.
Thank you. So we'll stick to the topic. There's been a motion made regarding requirements at the request of council to have applicants make public presentations. So with regards to that, I'll ask if there's any further discussion. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion passes. Please go ahead, Councillor Ashley, on your other suggestions or considerations or comments.
Okay, and I'm sure other people have things as well. And I'm really glad that staff brought this forward, because the reason I asked last meeting was that I know, and I know that all of us know this, that we have some serious expenditures that are going to be happening in the next few years regarding infrastructure and all these different things. We don't have a lot of money, and I think we need something that is going to help us better determine what grants we give out and how we're using our money. So I looked up a number of different cities' grant policies, and I kind of picked different things out of them that I thought might be something that we could use as a starting point. Looked at Terrace, Prince George, Smithers, Burns Lake, a whole bunch of different policies. And so what I was going to do is just list off some of the different ideas, and then people can comment on them as they want to. One of the different, or not different, but one of the things that some of the policies, or a lot of them had, was that it just had a thing in the preamble that said that financial assistance was based on the city's fiscal capacity. So it just, just as a reminder to, and I'm not sure in our policy if it has that, but just as a reminder, we have only a limited amount of funds. So if people know that, we only have that much money, having that in a preamble might be a good idea. And it also said that financial assistance needed to be demonstrated, that they actually needed it, that there wasn't other sources that they could go to that would be able to give them the money instead of that. Another thing that was in some of the policies was that priority was be given to ones that fit into the city's strategic objectives, or OCP, so that there was something specific that we could tie it to. There was a policy, like we have a policy right now that groups are supposed to be looking for other sources of funding. They're supposed to tell us about that. But they actually listed some of the other sources that they did expect them to look at. So they say things like including other government sources, and in that they said including the regional district, but I think it could even be expanded to say looking at other local First Nations governments, and are there places where perhaps they could be approached for various different grants, looking at other non-government grants, looking at user fees, have they approached all of those different aspects. Another thing that I thought was interesting is that many of them had a cap. They said, this is how much money we have for grants and aids, and that is as much as we are going to spend. So whatever we have for the applications, we have to fit it into that amount of money. And I thought that was good, because it would give us something very specific. Okay, we got this many people to give money to, and we only have this much money, so we need to make some decisions. Another thing that I thought was interesting is that many of the different cities had things where they would only fund projects up to, say, 50% and up to a maximum of a certain amount, like $2,000 or something like that. And they had to show that they had done fundraising. Sometimes they had to show matching funds, all of those types of things. And I thought that was an interesting thing. Sometimes they required them to have a collaboration with other people, so that they have to show that they're actually working together. So if there are a number of groups that are kind of working towards the same goal, they have to show that they've actually talked to other groups before they come to us and ask us for money, so they're not doubling up on efforts. I think we have this in our policy, but I think it's important because one of the things that is in there is considerable volunteer involvement, and priority being given to groups that use many volunteers and or limit the amount of paid people, because it's money that we're giving, to help different groups. The same thing that Councillor Garon was mentioning. In fact, most of them had different categories for grants. So they would have, for example, our Big Six, they would have under something that would be like either funding to cultural organizations or fee for service or something like that, and then they would have things for in-kind, and then separate they would have different ones. And I think it just makes it easier when you do that kind of thing. Another one that was interesting, because we always have them coming to us with asking for an increase, and at least 4 or 5 of the ones I looked at tied any increase that was asked for to whatever the percentage tax increase was for that year. So any increase that they looked at had to be only the amount of the tax increase. So I thought that that was an interesting one. Some other ones were things about having a broad base of community support, other sources of financial support. Sometimes there was a requirement to show like how many people would actually attend so that they could see, okay, there's this many people that are actually using it, as opposed to like, if there's 20 versus 200, that kind of thing. Just looking to make sure I'm not doubling up on things. Some of them even had it very specific, saying that they had numbers of people and saying if you had 0 to 99, you could get this much. If you had over 100 to 200, you could get this much. And so it's tied to how many people were actually in there. And another one that I thought was important was that we have our permissive tax exemptions, and there was at least one that had it where it was said specifically that if they were given a permissive tax exemption, that would be taken into account when we looked at the grant. And I thought that that was a useful one. And probably, I think there's just two more. There was one that said that if groups receive grants from other organizations who also receive city funding, they're ineligible for the grant. So that we're not doubling up. So we're not giving a grant to somebody who then gives grants out to people. So I thought that one made sense. And then, actually I think that's the last one. So I've got all of this. I can give it to staff, so if they've missed some of the things. But those are the things that I thought, some areas where I think it would be good for us to kind of look at our policy and try and implement some of those types of things.
Certainly, because this is the first time the majority of council have heard about this. If you'd like to give it to the staff, they can analyze it and prepare a report for the council for their consideration. Okay, thank you very much. Next is a report from the Chief Financial Officer, and this concerns the November 2011 monthly department report. And there's a recommendation that council receives this report for information purposes. Mr. Rodin, would you like to outline your report, please?
Certainly, Your Worship. This again is a snapshot of where we are at the end of October. The revenue-wise in our operating budget, we're going to be okay. We're actually going to exceed the budgeted revenue. There's a number of reasons for that. Ferry revenue is going to be a bit higher. The cemetery revenue is up due to more burial permits. Development services, there's a significant increase, and that's occurred because in the original budget we assumed that we would have sold the Skeena Queen Charlotte Regional District building early in the year. That sale has now just taken place, and so we collected far more rent than we anticipated that we were going to. So it was sort of a good thing in one way. And we've also received, in fiscal revenue, we've received some unanticipated revenues there. One being debenture surplus funds, another a grant from the RCMP that they paid about $110,000 towards the video camera that's in the cell block. Expenditure-wise, the operating fund, most departments will be close to budget by the end of the year, so we should be anticipating a small surplus overall. The utility budgets, revenues are good, and the expenditures are slightly under budget. I've also provided a schedule showing the various capital works projects that were slated for work this year. Please do advise that most of them have been completed on time and reasonably close to budget. There's a few that have been rolled over into 2012 due to lack of manpower. And, of course, there's the RCMP cell renovation that we've earmarked $1 million for, and that is basically pending resolution of the whether to build or renovate the existing public safety buildings. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. I'll ask council to adopt the recommendation that council receives this report for information purposes, and certainly once the motion is moved and seconded, if there's any questions of Mr. Rodin, we'll handle them at that time. Moved by Councillor Kenny, seconded by Councillor Ashley, that Council receive this report for information purposes. Are there any questions of Mr. Rodin? Councillor Ashley.
I'm just wondering, under fiscal revenue, could you explain what the debenture surplus funds exactly are?
Certainly, if I may, Your Worship.
Certainly, go ahead.
What the city does is it borrows money for large capital projects from an organization called the Municipal Finance Authority. The Municipal Finance Authority then turns around and borrows money on the New York debenture market, and they borrow, tens of millions of dollars at a time. So what will happen is that, say, Prince Rupert, we borrowed $3 million for water sewer retrofit, and 20 other municipalities also borrowed money from the MFA at the same time. All that would be pooled together, and a debenture would be issued, and that's why the city gets such great rates on its borrowing. So then what will happen is that over the next 20 or 25 years, in our case it's usually been 25 years, every year the city will make an interest payment, and they'll also make a principal payment. The principal payment is it's not like a car loan, whereas when you go to the bank and you get a car loan, the bank says $250 every 2 weeks for 5 or 7 years. That's what you pay. What happens in our situation is that the Municipal Finance Authority will say, okay, you'll pay $175,000 every 6 months on the principal. Okay, and what will happen is that money will be put into a sinking fund, and it will earn money itself. Okay, now if the sinking fund does really good, and they usually design these so that they underestimate how much the sinking fund is going to be worth at maturity, so that there will be a small surplus. Okay, so what will happen is that the city will put its $175,000 twice a year for 20 years. But after 19 and a half years, if the sinking fund is done well, then there might actually be a bit of a surplus in the sinking fund, and the city won't make that last payment, and it'll also get a little bit of money back, and they call that a debenture surplus.
It's a long-standing fund of the Municipal Finance Authority, and the sinking fund is built that way to cover off any eventualities over the term of the debenture, and because can be 10, 15, or 20 years, it's created in case there's an economic downturn, things can still be covered. Are there any other questions of Mr. Rodin? If not, I'll call for the question. The question has been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion is adopted. Now there's a report from the city planner, and it concerns what we refer to as a waterfront plan for our harbor. In this case, it's entitled an Urban Waterfront Plan, and it's regarding the context of the plan, and there are some recommendations there. Mr. Krekic, would you please outline the recommendation to Council, and then you can certainly provide some background.
Thank you, Your Worship. And since this report contains a number of attachments, I have them also on the screen so that can aid.
Perhaps you could go through the recommendations first, so those people watching at home will have an understanding, first of all, of the various parts to this, because there's quite a lot of information here to be absorbed and to subsequently, upon adoption, if it is adopted, to work with going forward. And the waterfront plan has been of primary interest to the community when the recent revisions to the official community plan were initially started.
Certainly, Your Worship. The three recommendations are, number one, that the Council mandates staff to join Port Rupert Port Authority in developing Cow Bay East Master Land Use Plan, which may cause amendments to Cow Bay Development Permit Area boundaries and design guidelines. The second recommendation is that the Council enters into interest-based negotiations with CN and PRPA for the area to the west of CN Station in order to define that define what is possible and what is off the table. These negotiations should be at the highest level, council to PRPA board of directors, in order to give traction to the work which will follow by staff of each organization. And recommendation number 3, that the land use planning along the city waterfront clearly identifies ownership, jurisdiction, and determines the different authorities' interest in abiding with city's land use regulations.
Thank you. And just before you go into your background, if you describe to the people watching at home and certainly to the people in the gallery tonight what the city actually owns on the waterfront, which turns out to be a rather small amount.
There are 2 attachments to the report, and I've divided them in 2 areas, to the west of CN Station and to the east of CN Station. The legend shows Crown federal lands, CN lands. Now it's important to understand that once CN is a natural person when it owns lands. However, once there is trackage on the land, it becomes part of the Railway Act
Right.
and Canada Transportation Act.
But the portion the city owns is the water lot in front of the Rotary Waterfront Park, in front of the old, when I say in front of, I mean on the water,
Right.
in front of the old CN rail station,
Right.
and up to where the old railway, or pardon me, vehicle bridge was, on or about to the front yard of the Pillsbury House.
Right. So on a map, the map is actually split. The little hand is right where the railway station is. This is the water lot.
Right.
Very little land. This is also a water lot to the right. There's also one here, which is essentially a right-of-way for the
a
outfall.
sewer outfall, yes.
And to the east, we're continuing again. This is the CN station and 2 more lots here. So essentially, the city owns water lots, but very little upland.
Thank you. Would you like to provide the rest of the background in your report, please?
This is as you mentioned, it's a fairly involved report. It's got a number of facts, and I will just breeze through it very quickly with anticipation that there will be some conversation, questions, and discussion. The first part in preparing this report was defining what is the waterfront. My task was to do a waterfront plan, and so that can mean different things to different people. Trails connecting. So this is essentially the municipal boundaries, Cane Island, and so when we say waterfront, the entire island is surrounded by water. And so it can mean trails that exist around the city and from time to time talk about circumnavigating the island with trails. It could be access to any number of beaches, bays, and areas that are along the waterfront. Or it can mean this area here that I finally narrowed down for this specific report, which is what I call urban waterfront. And that is the area where the community essentially meets the waterfront. Generally, in reference in a report, I refer to east and west, although that's not exact direction, but for the easiness of understanding, it follows the avenues of the city. The considerations that were taken in account in preparing this report are the principal land use management tools which we have in the city, which is the official community plan, which in City of Prince Rupert we refer to as quality of life official community plan, the zoning bylaw with the attached development permit areas, and I've also included the Port of Prince Rupert land use management plan. Arguably, there are more documents that may apply to this work, but these are the primary documents with respect to land management and land use. And the scope of this document is definitely not a land use plan. It's really the context of what planning efforts would have to be taken into account in the future because of its size and of its involvement. Just a little bit about the area. The city of Prince Rupert grew out of the waterfront, which is where the land meets the sea and trains meets the ships. And it really hasn't changed very much since early 1900s. Some pictures in a report are by the permission of the Prince Rupert Archives, and it shows a picture from 1914 and 1947, and they're essentially relatively same as they are today. There are changes, but they're not drastic changes. The other part is the city of Prince Rupert was a planned community from a get-go. And although it is not rare in Canada, it's less frequent in British Columbia to have the community that's existed on a surveyed plan, legally surveyed plan, since 1909. So we still have the street patterns that were defined, they were first of all designed and defined in 1909. So while our technology has changed our lifestyle drastically, some of the infrastructure remains the same. In fact, much of our water system and sewer system is from 1910s. And similarly, the infrastructure of transportation hasn't changed. And so where the sea meets the waters, where the train meets the ships, continuously exist. We did have some changes in technology, which has essentially improved the delivery, the rendering of our resources, to which end, to the east, approximately 20 years ago or so, CN gave up a right-of-way that led from the CN station, to Seal Cove. That, combined with the city and port cooperation to develop cruise ship dock and thereafter Athlone terminal, really gave a huge transformation to what we now call Cow Bay, which was aided by then developed design guidelines and really has developed something that's becoming a little bit of an example in urban design in British Columbia, how something can be transformed to a new urban fabric. So to the east, things are really working actually quite well within a context of community aspiration and an ability to access the waterfront. To the west, the transportation corridor still dominates the landscape. And all that said, the waterfront remains characterized by industrial use, which creates opportunities as in economy, which creates conflicts as in access to water, and issues as in adjoining land uses. Going to considerations, quality of life official community plan. I'm not going to bore you going through it. It's on the website. It's easily retrievable. But our community plan contains two components. It contains the quality of life component, which is what council may do when creating policies. And it contains the official community component, which is what council must do when it creates policies. And so the policies that are directly relating to the waterfront are in italic text on page 4. And probably the most pertinent policy is the last one, and I will read it to you. The city waterfront is controlled largely by private owners and continues to serve important part of transportation function. The city will make every effort to collaborate with CN Rail and with the Port Authority to ensure that future development makes provisions for public waterfront access that is safe and recognizes the economic importance of port land use. While linear park development may prove impractical, the opportunity for nodal open space / viewpoints and similar feature public spaces shall be an important consideration in any new harbor-related land use. The latter shall be considered in joint prepared downtown waterfront plan involving C and PRPA and the city. So that policy really, that policy is going to echo through, essentially that policy echoes in my recommendations. Zoning bylaw, relatively recent document, essentially recognized the previous land use and zoning, and so approximately 2/3 of the entire waterfront is zoned industrial. And I will quickly just scan. So so this is down at the Ridley Island. The text is quite small, but this is, if I zoom any further, you will lose the context. This is all zone industrial around here.
If you zoom any further, Mr. Krekic, you'll give every member of council eye strain.
I'm trying my best, Your Worship. I'm trying my best. I'll move to the waterfront, urban waterfront, and so. So if we move from
Councillor Ashley, is that okay for your eyes?
Can you see that? So if we move from Fairview Terminal, M3 is industrial. It continues M3 all along the way. It meets P1 and R, which is residential and public use. It continues as M3. There's a small section within the context of the entire waterfront. It's a fairly large section. It's a noticeable section, which is C1, which is a dip of the downtown commercial area into what the CN station is right now, and C5, which is recently has been rezoned from M3 during the recent zoning bylaw changes, and essentially coincides with the Cow Bay development permit area. And then it continues as M3 all around the Horn. Now this is an interesting little piece because the water lots are zoned M3, while the terrestrial lots are zoned P1, public use. Nevertheless, it's still industrial use at the waterfront. We also have three development permit areas which are important in this discussion. Downtown development permit area, which dips down at the railway station. C5, which is now a Cow Bay development permit area, and all of the industrial areas in city of Prince Rupert, including this area down the Ridley Island, in Industrial Park, anywhere where you see M designation, M1, M2, M3, or M4, are development permit areas. Development permit areas essentially require a developer to come into to the staff at the application. Staff has ability to approve applications that are up to $100,000. Anything over $100,000 has to be approved by the council. And it's all about form and shape. It's about fences. It's about lighting. It's about how the buildings look like, facades, windows, and stuff like that. The last document, which is part of this discussion, is the Port of Prince Rupert Land Use Management Plan, on which I reported in the past, and essentially there's quite a fundamental legislative difference as to how city manages their lands and how Port, as federal authority operating on federal lands, manages their land. And to that end, I will talk a little bit about land ownership jurisdiction. And so the Crown lands federal Crown lands are exempt from municipal regulations and requirements. Essentially, they operate all federal lands. That includes Department of Fisheries federal lands, which are down at the scale of Co. That includes Port of Prince Rupert federal lands. That includes Indian reserves. Anywhere where we have federal jurisdiction, they're completely outside of the municipal legislation, and that is exactly the same in every province in Canada, and it's been exactly the same since 1867. Because that's when British Columbia joined Canada, and it remains like that today. It's a fairly it's been tried at the courts. It's black and white, and that exemption actually goes to their people who lease land from federal lands. And so those are these red pieces of land which are quite substantial. The yellow pieces of land are actually CN lands. And CN is actually operates as a natural person when they own the land, except wherever a trackage enters the property, that right of way and railway yard fall under the Railway Act and Canada Transportation Act. And so the simplicity of Section 26(1), which is now Railway Act, says no person shall without lawful excuse enter a land on which a line work is situated. Originally, that was put in to safeguard trains from hitting livestock. But as the railway grew, it became more involved. Today, it creates huge issues in many urban communities, to the point that in 2006, CN, or federal government, required CN to conduct a panel across Canada, out of which there is a policy that's attached to this document. And this policy essentially repeats the importance of the railway as a national transportation corridor, and reminds the railway operators to work with people who own lands adjoining to them, including municipalities. And there are words in here that ask for consultation, cooperation. And I think that is probably the area that I'm suggesting where our local government can talk to CN and Canada Transportation Agency to perhaps open up some communication and conversation about the area that's west of the CN station. That basically is my report, Your Worship. My conclusions are that the waterfront suggests different priorities to different people within the context of land use planning. Different approach should be taken when dealing with access to trails, access to beaches, and urban waterfront. They're fundamentally completely different land use and pieces of land use analysis. If they're combined together, they don't really work. Any future land use planning on waterfront is in general and specifically urban waterfront must clearly recognize land ownership jurisdictions. We really must understand the contents and the intent of the legislation before discussing what's possible. To the east of CN Station, development is taking shape as per community vision, and to that end, there has been, in a very short time, a substantial amount of work that took place with what we are starting to call Cow Bay East Master Land Use Plan. We're still sort of fighting with the words. I'm fighting with the words. But as a result of Port looking at purchasing Atlan Uplands, which is this little triangle right here, they have taken an approach of looking at the looking at the development comprehensively, even though they could do this development very much individually. That project can go without having to do a master land use plan. But the first few steps that I participated with the port really leads to these pictures that I'm showing you here, is that the Athlin Terminal uplands instigate us thinking about Lot 9, which is owned by CN, except this Lot 9 is not encumbered by trackage. So it's a simple piece of land, except it's encumbered with contamination, which apparently is in the process of being completed. Third Avenue extension is another big piece that would allow Third Avenue to be extended to configuration, something along this line right here, and it would free up the bridge over the Cameron Slough to become less used. It's a fairly old bridge. Our Public Works and manager of engineering basically shudders each time he sees a big truck on it because it can collapse. If it collapses, then we are in a real...
So you're talking about a truck bypass that would run past the side of the Rona Building Supply Store
Exactly.
and come out onto George Hills Way at approximately the entrance, across the road entrance to Ocean Fisheries.
It's something, you know, the actual alignment is this is very conceptual alignment, and it does. It can be seen as a bypass. It can be seen as just extending our road network that would allow more ability to push heavy traffic through. But also we clearly step to the east side of Cameron Slough, and we start to work on now Cow Bay East, which is the natural area for expansion. Athlin Terminal is going. Athlin Upland Development is going to take up.
So, are you talking about the Cow Bay Slough or Cameron Cove?
Cameron Slough. I called it Cow Bay until I was corrected that it's Cameron Slough.
Well, Cameron Slough is on the other side of the road, at the very far end of the Cow Bay Slough, and Cameron Cove is actually now a parking lot.
Okay.
Anyway, go on, please.
The little piece of water that's...
I thought you were going to actually. I thought you were going to actually delve into the point where as we were transitioning to a modern community, we got rid of the wood stave pipes and the corduroy roads. Although I have to note that in the city's 2012 budget, there is consideration of removing what is probably the last corduroy road in the city.
Where is that, Your Worship?
9th Avenue East.
Okay.
Please go on, though.
I will clarify that with the people who gave me this information and that I was corrected on. But essentially, we start developing Cow Bay to the east. We potentially replace parking lot that we lose in the Athlin Uplands development. And we start to provide opportunities for new commercial area, new access to water, which is going to be, along the lines of the policy that it will not be a linear walkway around the waterfront, but it will be pointed developments with embellished access. And everything to the east is really working within a context of the community aspirations. Everything that I've seen in the official community plan and every conversation that I've had is starting to come to fruition. To the west there's a lot more work to be done.
Right, thank you. I'll ask Council's consideration of the three recommendations. If we can get those moved and seconded, then if those are going to be a consideration of the Council through the moving and seconding of those recommendations, we can then see if Council members have any questions of staff. Councillor Kinney. Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Guerin. It's been moved and seconded with regard to those three recommendations. Are there any questions of staff? Councillor Ashley.
I just have a couple of them. The first one was with regard to the other map that you had up there. You had Crown lands and other things, but I was wondering what the blue was. I couldn't read what the blue part. Is that private? Because
there's Crown land. There's the light blue is the one at the bottom is provincial Crown land, and the clear blue is private land.
And is
this would be private here. And I do have all the ownerships, but I don't have it with that.
No, I wasn't going to ask you who owned it, but I just was wondering, is that water lot or is that land as well?
Well, if you follow this lot
Mr. Krekic, could you put your microphone on, please?
Mike.
If you follow this lot here that I'm pointing, you can see that the lot stops at the rail right-of-way. So essentially, there is very little uplands for this water lot. I would say that we also have mapping that shows the original surveys. I would suggest that most of this area here is filled.
That's where the old J.S. McMillan plant is, right on the foreshore there. Please go ahead, Councillor Ashley.
And my second question, I think I know the answer to this, but just to clarify, to just put it in a nutshell. Basically, with all of these different areas being owned by Crown or province or the port, essentially when you talk about the industrial development area, improvement area, it really doesn't end up applying. Is that correct? That they don't have to come before City Council because they are under federal jurisdiction. Is that correct?
It's correct, and I'll just qualify that areas that are red and orange, they fall outside of the municipal jurisdiction. So essentially, they do not have to come to the City Council for approval for any projects in that area.
Councillor Ashley, go ahead, please.
And that would also apply, I'm guessing, to CN wherever there is tracks on their land? Okay, thank you.
Now, having said that, federal government has a slightly different process in development, which includes environmental screening, which requires public consultation, but does not, the municipal and federal jurisdictions do not meet.
Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Zeno, on the parking area that you were looking at, where the contamination is, can you not build a parking lot because it's not houses or anything? Can you not build over that?
Contaminated site legislation, it's quite an involved piece of legislation. Unless the area is right-of-way, road right-of-way, it has to be remediated for any other use. There's level of different uses that coincide with the level of different remediation. So your question is, if that parking lot was right-of-way, road right-of-way, then it can be paid over for parking lot, but it cannot be used for anything else in the future. And if any time in the future it were to be used for something else, that remediation will have to take place then. We did a similar thing for CN Station, if you remember.
Councillor Carlick Pearson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just wondering about the CN building, and considering that there is a business opportunity sign that's going up on the building right now for a Mr. Mike's. How does that work in terms of do we have to form a partnership with CN, or
Mr.
because
Howie
it
will
isn't a
explain
business opportunity?
the ownership of that property. Mr. Howie.
Your Worship, the city acquired that property from CN a number of years ago, and the city put it out, has an operating or a development agreement with a firm, and that firm is the one that's seeking tenants. And there are some requirements for having that work completed within having the building upgraded within a certain period of time. I think that runs out either later this year or early next year. So the city actually did enter into a partnership agreement.
Are there any other questions of staff? Councillor Ashley.
It's not so much a question, but since we do have a motion on the floor, I thought I'd make a comment regarding the recommendation. I will be speaking in favor of the recommendation. I think it makes sense. We know that we've had people in front of us with regards to the proposed pellet facility at the waterfront, and I think that with the future of Prince Rupert and the port expanding and everything, chances are there's going to be more and more of those types of things that are going to be coming before council. So it makes sense for us to have some sort of guidelines and some sort of master plan, and to work with CN and the port so that we can even though they're not mandated to, if they're interested in working with us on things that fit into our OCP, then it makes sense for us to work with them and come up with something that is mutually agreeable, as opposed to kind of waiting for things to come and then deciding after. So it makes sense to me.
So in other words, you're stating it's better to be proactive than reactive.
That would be correct.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of staff or questions of council members to staff? Councillor Rice.
Thank you. I'm just reading the recommendations, which I will vote in favor of, but I'm just curious if you could flesh out what you see the future relationship looking like with the Port Authority of Prince Rupert. Because it's been communicated to me by the Port Authority in one of our meetings that the relationship could be better, and that they were going to make such an effort to just dialogue and communicate plans with the City of Prince Rupert. But I'm just curious from your point of view what that would look like. And
Mr. Krekic, have you had any cursory discussions with the port on this?
I've had discussions with them on this project that's on the screen right now, and to that end, in fact, in this area here, majority of the land is a municipal jurisdiction. And the project that's located, what I call Upland Uplands, which is a triangle where a parking lot is right now, the intent it is for it to be converted to federal lands. But all of my initial conversations with their design team and the people then conversing at the port was that they will follow all the design guidelines and requirements of the zoning bylaw and development permit area. That's really different jurisdiction will have to recognize and commit to which level are they going to participate in the municipal regulations, and that's why I call it interest rather than position-based. Legislation places you in position-based negotiations, but there's a line. The line is hard drawn, and that's all there is to it. So it's more, and that's the wisdom of the council and politicians and the board of directors to be able to decide how far that envelope will stretch and in which format it will stretch, so that us staffers can then work on the details.
So you're using the broad brush approach, are you?
No. I'm being.
Well, you were pontificating there on the wisdom of local politicians and councils and boards.
Exactly.
And,
exactly.
I thought we were going to have a runaway there for a minute, but you managed to contain yourself.
Yes, Your Worship.
Councillor Guerin.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to commend staff on doing such a great job on this, and I'm really looking forward to having us work with CN and the port. And I think this project is long overdue, and it's an exciting piece of the puzzle that needs to be put into place. So I really look forward to how this all plays out.
Councillor Rice.
One quick question, stemming from your council and politicians comment. I'm just curious to know at what point, if there is one already that I'm just not aware of, do the politicians actually get involved in the relationship with the Port Authority? Because, I mean, as it is now, basically it is you and the Port Authority, you on behalf of the City of Prince Rupert, sort of working out this plan. But I'm curious to know if it would be broadened to include the politicians.
Staff will report their findings and recommendations to the council.
Right.
For consideration. But there's certainly opportunity for comment and public input going forward, as well as through these various organizations, which is part of the overall plan, because of course this is part of the official community plan. It's a part that we're just now embarking upon. Right. Mr. Howie.
Again, just further to that Your Worship, the intent is that we'll do a little more work on this, and then we'll be recommending to council, or just following up on the resolution, that the council itself will make a formal request to the Port Board that we work to arrive at a mutually satisfactory conclusion, and that might include some additional details as to what council would be looking for. So that will come back to council for formal adoption at a later date.
Councillor Garon? No? Are there any further questions? If not, I'll thank you very much, Mr. Krekic. Certainly.
I was being sincere, Your Worship and Councillor Rice. I'm a technician. I do not deal in a realm of anything else by applying the tools that I have given to me by the politicians. And I was being sincere that the wisdom really comes from this table, not from technicians.
Certainly, and perhaps it was my attempt at humor that foiled that. But I can tell you that nobody's doubting your sincerity nor the depth at which you can discuss these things, and it's reflected in the appropriate manner in which your report is written. And for people that are interested in the waterfront and a waterfront plan, this report is on a public agenda, and you're welcome to pick up a copy, or you're welcome to access it on the city website and see how all-inclusive it is, and just the direction that is being proposed at this point. And the waterfront is one of the issues that continually comes up over time. The city is not, because of the makeup of the community, we're essentially established as a railway community, and the Brett and Hall plan of 1909 that you mentioned is actually designed in such a way that it precludes a lot of public access to the waterfront, and it's no mistake that the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway designed it that way. But having said that, over the years in various communities there's been gentrification of parts of the waterfront for public use, and it is a highly desirable topic, and so going forward it's appropriate. But you have covered it off well, and certainly what you've done so far is appreciated, and we'll see what we can do with the other corporate entities in the community. Thank you very much. I'll call for the question on the motion. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion passes. Next is a report from the Director of Recreation, and this concerns a recreation infrastructure grant. And there is a recommendation that Council adopt a resolution supporting the Director of Recreation and Community Services Community Recreation Infrastructure Grant application for an elevator and an indoor playground. I'll ask Council to consider that recommendation. If there's a mover and a seconder, then we'll then go to staff for some background. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Carlick-Pearson. Mr. Howie, would you please outline the text of the report?
Yes, Your Worship. At UBCM time last fall, the province announced that they were setting up a fund of $30 million for municipalities and regional districts to improve recreation facilities. Mr. Kelly has taken a look at some of the needs in the Civic Center. One of the needs that we've been trying to fund for a long time is an elevator to allow for easy access to the second floor of the facility, and to allow access to seating and viewing area in the arena. And so that is one component of this application. The other is to provide a space for young children, sort of a playroom with equipment in it suitable for young children, and that would entail converting the Eagle Room, which is on the second floor of the Civic Center, into that kind of activity space. So it wouldn't be program space, it would be activity space for drop-ins, and if there was the occasional group that wanted to rent it for some period of time, that's probably allowable too. And then the thinking there is that places like Moose Totlot are not always available under sunny circumstances, and it would give us an indoor play area. The total cost of the project is approximately $310,000, and the city budget implication is $62,000. We can work that into. We're looking at sources of funding for that, which might involve switching some priorities on the capital side in the 2012 budget, or looking at some of the projects that have been completed and completed under budget.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? Judy?
Just a question about the budget. Like, can you divide up each? Like, what does the elevator cost and what does the playground cost? It's not in here. I don't see it in here anyways.
Actually, it's in the. You're right. It's just given as a lump sum. Sorry, it's given as a lump sum in the application. I don't have that breakdown here.
Please go ahead.
I think that it's only fair that we see both of them divided up to see the importance of one or the other or both combined.
The cost of both combined are there. One of my difficulties is I've got to get this application in order to meet deadlines. So, it's an application, and council can decide at a later date whether it wishes to proceed with one or both of the projects. So it still gives me time to come back to you with the cost.
Certainly. Thank you. Councillor Ashley.
I know that the elevator has been something that's been considered for a while, like that we just haven't had the money. So if it was, I'm just trying to clarify here, if the grant was just for the elevator, are the chances less that we would be able to receive the grant, considering the reason for the application?
No, I don't think that's part of their criteria. And Mr. Rodin tells me that probably the total project would be about 2/3 for the elevator and 1/3 for equipment and redoing the Eagle Room. But that's not. I don't have that from Mr. Kelly, but that's probably a close amount.
Councillor Ashley, then Councillor Kinney.
And then if I understand staff correctly, while the money isn't sort of necessarily budgeted in our preliminary budget, that there are places where we could find this money that wouldn't affect what our preliminary budget is at this point?
That's correct.
Appropriation of those funds would be subject to approval. Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this is a great thing because so many people are limited what they can do at the Civic Center. Maybe we can bring more people in again with the pottery classes, etc., by having this. I think it's good.
Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
I do think that
the member of council with the youngest of the next generation.
I am the youngest.
How old's your son now?
3.
Okay, I wasn't referring to you. I was referring to your son.
Oh. But I am still the youngest on camera. Right, Jen? I do believe that I'm pretty close.
We got a competition starting here. Anyway, please go ahead.
I think the importance is there for both, and we're looking at a whole bunch of different groups that making things more accessible. However, the pottery classes and different programs in the Civic Center could we live without the playground in the Civic Center? Possibly, right? The elevator, it's a need for accessibility. So we do have the growing space in Prince Rupert that does have our children, that my 3-year-old who I could bring there, or any other programs, after school programs that we do utilize. So the question is, do we want it? Do we need it? And is it, like Councillor Ashley said, if we could find it in our budget and it won't affect anything, then okay. But if it's close, then we may have to reconsider.
Certainly. Thank you for your comment. Councillor Kinney and then Councillor Rice.
I think, Your Worship, as Mr. Howie has said, we're going to have to take into consideration, because from UBCM, that money was put aside for recreation.
purposes, the 30 million.
It was in support of family
Yes.
activities.
Yes.
That's the basic criteria on that grant. Councillor Rice.
I just wanted to put it on the record just to note that in principle I absolutely support this grant, and I will vote in favor of this in order for Mr. Howie to meet the grant deadlines. But when I actually look at budget items sort of piecemeal as we're doing here, it's very hard for me to actually vote in confidence without doing a full budget workshop. So I guess I just wanted to say that in theory I would vote in favor of this to meet the grant deadline, but I'd want to sort of weigh the pros and cons of all the things that we're considering in the future with the budget.
Certainly. Thank you. Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I understand there's a deadline. I would have liked to have seen a little more work done on this, and this is where I'm pushing for some kind of a recreation commission or board, or because I think we really could use more input from the community on something like this in the future. But I'll be voting in favor of it, but I would like to see more programming or something happen with this, because that's what the Civic Center needs. Is we need more people down there, more programming. So.
Right, everybody understands that we're trying to catch a grant here, and Mr. Howie, if you'd have the breakdown provided by email to the council members, they can see what the elevator costs are and what the indoor playground costs would be.
Will do, Your Worship.
Thank you. There's nothing further. I'll call for the question. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That passes. We'll move on to additional items. And that is item number 11, which is appointments of council. Mr. Howie, would you please outline the report in its entirety?
There are several committees and organizations that council either appoints or, well, in this particular case, they're all committees that council appoints, and council appoints members of council to those as well. Discussions about which members of the public may serve are held at an in-camera meeting, because that falls under privacy regulations, and we're discussing individuals. However, it's been council's usual practice off and on to do the appointment of members of council to those committees at a public meeting, and Mr. Krekic has a list of those committees that require members of council and suggested names for those appointments. So I'll just let him run through the list.
Certainly, Mr. Krekic. Thank you, Mr. Howie.
Thank you, Your Worship. The recommendation is that council, by resolution, approve the appointments as listed below. That council appoint Councillor Garon to the Prince Rupert Airport Society Board. That council appoint Councillor Thorkelson to the Prince Rupert Library Board. That council appoint Councillor Carlick Pearson and Councillor Kinney to the Medical Facilities and Equipment Committee. That council appoint Councillor Rice and Councillor Carlick Pearson to the Civic Awards and Recognition Committee. That council appoint Councillor Kinney to the Performing Arts Society Board. That council appoint Councillor Carlick Pearson to the Tourism Prince Rupert Board. And that council appoint Councillor Kinney to the North Coast Regional Steering Committee.
Thank you very much. I'll ask for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Ashley?
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Carlick Pearson is a seconder. Is there any discussion by members of council? Councillor Ashley?
I just wanted to make it clear that the recommendations that were brought forward by staff were based on councillors indicating interest in being on the various committees, and that's where it came from.
Right. Nobody was forcibly imposed upon. Is that what you'd like to say?
It was more just as a comment so that people understood that it wasn't just randomly picked by staff, but that people wanted to be on these various committees.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other comments? If not, I'll ask for the question. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those appointments are made. Next is reports from the city manager on outstanding council initiatives. Mr. Howie.
Your Worship, I don't have anything of any significance to report this evening. We'll do up a report for the next council meeting, which is usually the time that I submit a written report, and it's also the time when there is committee of the whole. So the information is out there to the public before that meeting. We're also just over the Christmas and New Year's season, which thankfully we got through without too much snow, but little in the way of things to report to council.
Thank you very much. One of them, of course, will be the snow removal budget for 2011 and how much got spent.
That'll be in Mr. Rodin's report. Yeah.
We'll move on to reports, questions, and inquiries from members of council. Are there any? Councillor Kenny?
Thank you, Your Worship. Your Worship, I'd like to send out congratulations to the Special Events Committee for all the work they did over Christmas and the lighting and everything. They've done a wonderful job, and I think they really deserve a letter of thanks.
Okay, if you'd like to make that a motion.
I would like to make that a motion.
Is there a seconder? Thank you. It's been seconded by Councillor Ashley. I'll just comment on that there was a lot of appreciation, and I've certainly got a lot of comments about the effect and how much people enjoyed it. Are there any other comments from members of council? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Is there anything else? Councillor Ashley.
I have a couple questions. The first one is related to a presentation given to us by the airport board last council meeting. And I've had a couple people come up and ask me more about the first aid that they said that people were trained with out at the airport. And there was a question that I'm hoping that staff can pass on and see if we can get an answer back. And the questions basically revolved around what level of first aid are people trained with? Like, is it a basic first aid, or is it like level 2, 3, industrial, whatever? And how many people are trained at those levels so that we have a better understanding of what they're capable of doing out there?
Right. Okay.
So that's the first question. And the second one has to do with City West. And during the election, we were all briefed on various things that were happening at City West, and they gave us a lot of information that was good about the future. And when we were in that briefing session, they did indicate that at some point in the future, they would look at perhaps having a public information session where there would be perhaps a chance for people to submit questions in some form or another, and then they could address questions and concerns that people had. I don't expect anything to happen immediately, but what I was wanting to do is just follow up on that and see whether or not we can inquire as to if they're planning that and what sort of way they might be planning on doing that, because I've had a number of people ask me about that because several of us have mentioned that they were willing to do that.
Certainly. Mr. Howie, do you require a motion of council for that?
No, Your Worship. They're just questions, and I'll get the answers to both.
Sure. Thank you very much. Is there anything further? Yes, please go ahead, Councillor Rice.
Councillor Ashley triggered my memory regarding this something future that I'd like to discuss, which is I was actually trying to assist a constituent recently access something from the city's website, but I happen to use an iPhone as a smartphone, and since the city's website is it starts out with a flash-based program. If you have an iPhone, you cannot access the city's website. So I know you're embracing this technology talk, Mayor of Mussallem, but for example, as an iPhone user, if there is a website I go to that might have a flash-based video in it, I won't be able to view it, which is not the end of the world. But when our website is actually a flash-based website, which starts out with that, you can't even get in and look at the text or the words. So iPhones becoming increasingly more popular, and with City West now actually coming on board with iPhones, I think it would be really important that we actually are up to speed with our technology and be accessible.
So your question is?
My question is, do you foresee in the future that the City of Prince Rupert's website will be iPhone compatible?
Mr. Rodin.
The website was built approximately 5.5 years ago, and it was a fair amount of planning that went into it. The hope is to renew it and refresh it and redo it. Unfortunately, it does cost money, and we'll probably, right now what we're doing is we're looking at, we're probably one of the few websites out there that carried itself in 5 translations. We had Chinese, Japanese, German, French, and English on our website, and costs have required us to drop some of those languages, but you can check in to see whether or not we can at least drop the Flash base thing off the beginning, so you can go in and see the text. But again, it would be nice to rework the entire website, but that will cost a few dollars.
Councillor Rice, please go ahead.
My fantasy would be that we totally revamp our website. It's beautiful, but as a bare minimum, I think if we actually just changed, we could keep everything the same and just change the format to remove it from being a flash-based site, that at least the text and the PDFs, what I was looking for was trying to download the OCP. So yes, like in my big grand vision of things, we would have a new revamped website, but at the very minimum, if things could remain the same but just be accessible, would be my initial goal or my initial desire, if possible.
Certainly we'll get that done.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any other comments from members of council? Councillor Ashley.
Just related to the same type of thing, I think that there is some software that might enable that to happen. And another comment that I've had about the website, and I'm not sure if that's been corrected because I haven't tried, but when there are PDFs put on the website, sometimes if you go to search, you can't search the text of the document. And there were some people, because they want to search for a certain thing within a document. So if we could have staff look into what would be required to do that, I don't think it would be a major change.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Are there any further comments on this or any other topic? No? Okay. Thank you. I'll give the mayor's report. Along with other members of council, I attended a local government workshop, and it concerned governance, and it was for elected officials and senior management staff. I participated in a marine facilities meeting in consideration of improving areas to attract itinerant marine vessels transiting the North Coast. I'd also like to thank Ridley Terminals Incorporated for sponsoring a free community day at the city recreation facilities on December 21st, 2011 for children. This sponsorship as a corporate citizen to our city is appreciated. And I've also attended the Prince Rupert Rotary Club meeting and provided season's greetings and an overview of economic activity expected in the 2012 year. I'd also like to reference that the Prince Rupert Port Authority had another banner year in 2011, along with their tenants. At MAR terminals, there was a 20% increase in container traffic. Imports increased by 20% and exports increased by 17%. At Ridley Terminals Incorporated, in 2011, they shipped 9.64 million metric tons of product, and that's over the 2010 year, where they'd shipped 8.3 million metric tons. So there's an increase there of 16%. At Prince Rupert Grain, they had an increase of 17% in their shipments to over a total of 5 million metric tons. And the number of logs shipped from the harbor in 2011 increased by by almost 50% to 510,654 metric tons of logs. So it was a good year for the port, and each one of these entities has also hired additional people in 2011. And going forward, of course, there's improvements to be made with regards to the container facility and the ongoing improvements at the coal terminal. So I'd just like to acknowledge the port and the port's tenants for the amount of activity there. Thank you. I have nothing further. I'll ask the council's consideration of adjournment. Moved by Councillor Kenny, seconded by Councillor Ashley. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion passes. This meeting stands adjourned.